As I walk around the shops these days, I can't help but notice that there are still some people who are wearing masks and who look behind the mask as if they're rather terrified and concerned and worried. It may well be that these people are vulnerable in some particular way, but it strikes me that the most vulnerability which people show in this kind of atmosphere that we've been bombarded with propaganda and the propaganda of fear from advertisements and pronouncements from all sides, particularly about COVID over the last 2 years, is the propaganda of fear. And the way it's affected many, many people, some have shrugged it off now. I think the majority seem to have shrugged off any fear whatsoever. But there are still some people who remain paralysed by it. I say they may well have good concern, they may have good reason, because they may be particularly vulnerable. But nevertheless, we have suffered hugely as a society from being manipulated by those people who should have known better. Governments, newspapers, mainstream media, BBC, all seeking to get us to do a particular thing by pulling levers of fear. And I wanted to talk to you today about how you can protect yourself from being manipulated in this kind of way. Really, there's one fundamental tool which you need to use, and use consistently and use well, if you want to protect yourself from being the victim of other people's propaganda. That tool is very simple. It's adopting the habit of a critical mind. This is something I try and instill into my students, which is, I'm sometimes successful, sometimes not, but I tell them that the main thing I want to teach them is to be skeptical about whatever information comes their way. Take nothing on trust. Look for evidence of everything, particularly if it comes to you from the government or comes to you from the mainstream media. I find the mainstream media, from personal experience, is nearly always wrong about almost everything. And whether the fear which they're bombarding you with is overweight or climate change or tobacco issues or good old COVID, which has served them well in the past, the way in which to respond to that is to look at that critically. And what I find is that you can divide society up into two kinds of people. There are those people who will just accept whatever the government says or an authority says. If they're an authority figure, they just accept it on board. They have no gatekeepers for their mind. They allow in the ideas because, after all, these people should know what they're talking about. These are the people who should be able to tell us truthfully what's really happening in the world. These are the people who we can rely on and trust to tell us the truth. Unfortunately, I find that that's not the case. You have to discern the truth for yourself, and the only way you can do that is by adopting a critical attitude and a critical mind to everything. So that other kind of person, and I think they're very rare these days, maybe less than 5%. Less than 5% of the population have gatekeepers on their minds, on what they accept as being true or false. And although they may listen very carefully to what the media might have to say, what the BBC or anyone else might have to say, they will weigh it up. They will weigh up the good from the bad. They'll sort out the wheat from the chaff. They do not just accept everything uncritically. And what I suggest to my students, and I also suggest to you, is that you need to cultivate that mindset of not adopting whatever it is the group necessarily think simply because the group think it's true. If you end up thinking like that, you end up with groupthink, not with necessarily the truth. Approach everything that you hear critically and skeptically. Do not let anything pass into your mind and accept it as true unless you've seen the evidence for it. Sometimes you'll have to go and search for that evidence yourself. Sometimes you'll have to question things, but question everything that comes your way. Nullius in verba is the Royal Society's motto. Take nobody's word for it. And that is the attitude of true science, and it's the attitude of everybody who doesn't wish to be manipulated like the crowd and end up just being another group think victim.